In 2023, a man was charged €55 to print his own boarding pass at the gate. He was flying on the most profitable airline in Europe, an airline that charges you to sit next to your own child. The CEO once suggested installing coin slots on the lavatories, an airline that routinely finishes dead last in the customer satisfaction surveys across the entire continent. And yet, last year, 184 million people chose to fly with it. This is the story of how Ryanair weaponized everything you hate about flying and turned it into most ruthless profit machine the airline industry has ever seen. Every year, Ryanair carries more passengers than Lufthansa, British Airways, and Air France combined. And every year, they generate more complaints than all three put together. To understand how that's even possible, we have to go back to 1985. When Irish businessman Tony Ryfin founded that airline in 1984, it looked nothing like the yellow and blue monster we know today. It had 25 employees. It flew a single 15-seat turboprop between Waterford and London Gatwick. And its business model was simple: undercut Aer Lingus and British Airways on fares. Offer a decent service, hope people noticed. They did not. In 1991, O'Leary flew to Dallas to study an airline that was quietly breaking every rule of commercial aviation. Southwest flew one aircraft type, the 737. It avoided major hub airports. It offered no assigned seat, no free meals, no frequent flyer perks, and it was crushing every legacy US carrier on profit margins. O'Leary came back to Ireland with a plan, but unlike Southwest, which still prided itself on a friendly service and had a fun brand, O'Leary would take that model one step further. He would like to build an airline that treated passengers not as a customer, but as a cost to be minimized. One aircraft type, the Boeing 737, no business class, no loyalty program, no refunds, no connecting flights, no frills of any kind, and crucially, no major airports. Here's the detail most people miss about Ryanair, and it's the one that changed everything. When you book a flight to Paris on Ryanair, you're not flying to Paris, you're flying to Beauvais, a small airport 85 kilometers away from the city. When you book a flight to Frankfurt, you're landing at Frankfurt Hahn, 120 kilometers from Frankfurt. Brussels, Charlie, Milan, Bergamo, Stockholm, Skavsta, Oslo, Torp. These airports share three things. They are far from the city, they advertise, they are desperate for traffic, and they will pay Ryanair to fly there. That's not a metaphor. Regional airports across Europe subsidize Ryanair with landing fee discounts, marketing payments, and direct cash incentives, sometimes worth millions per year per route. In 2015, the European Commission ruled that some of these deals amounted to illegal state aid. Ryanair kept flying, the airports kept paying. So Ryanair cost structure looked like nothing else in aviation. While Lufthansa pays a fortune to operate out of Frankfurt, Main, Ryanair gets paid to fly into Frankfurt Hahn. It's not an airline flying to the airport. It's an airline renting itself out to the airport that needs traffic. That alone would give them a massive cost advantage, but O'Leary wasn't done yet. Starting in the early 2000s, O'Leary began systematically charging for things that every other airline gave away: checked baggage, carry-on that didn't fit a shrinking size template, seat selection, renting a boarding pass, changing a name on a ticket, using credit card to pay, water on board. Every single service became a line item. Every line item became a profit center. By 2019, what Ryanair called ancillary revenue, everything that was the ticket itself, had grown to over 30% of the company total income. For some flights, Ryanair made more money from fees than from fares. And here's a psychological trick. Because the headline ticket prices looked impossibly cheap, often under 20 euros, passengers felt they were getting a deal, even as they ended up paying 80 or 90 euros in add-on by the time they reached the gate. The press was merciless. O'Leary didn't care. He once suggested Ryanair would start charging passengers to use toilets. He floated the idea of selling standing-only tickets where passengers would hold into a pole for short flights. He publicly called his own customers stupid for not reading the term and the conditions. Other CEOs would have been fired within a week. O'Leary built a brand on it. While the public watched the outage theater, Ryanair operation team was building the most efficient short-haul airline on Earth. The Ryanair 737 spent an average of 25 minutes on ground between flights. At legacy carriers, the same turnaround takes 45 minutes to an hour. The difference means each Ryanair aircraft flies more sectors per day, generates more revenue, and pays down its own cost faster than any other competitor. The airline flies point to point only, no connection, no baggage transfers. If your inbound flight is delayed, Ryanair doesn't owe you anything on the next leg because there is no next leg. You booked two separate trips. They operate a single aircraft type, which means one pilot training program, one maintenance inventory, one set of procedures. Their fuel hedging strategy, locking in fuel prices years in advance, has saved them hundreds of millions while other airlines got crushed by oil spikes. And they based thousands of crew in Ireland under the Irish labour contracts, regardless of where they actually lived. They kept labour costs low and triggered years of strikes across Europe. By 2023, Ryanair was consistently ranked the worst airline in Europe for customer service, which 70 magazines called it the worst brand of any kind in the UK. Viral stories spread. A woman forced to pay to print boarding pass while holding her child. A man charged a fee for the wrong size carry-on after his bag had flown. Fine on the outbound flight. Passengers stranded for hours because Ryanair refused to rebook them on another carrier. The airline-owned Twitter account became famous for roasting complaining passengers. And then, in 2014, something strange happened. Ryanair launched a program called Always Getting Better. They started assigning seats, they allowed a second carry-on, they launched a mobile app that actually worked. They stopped weaponizing every interaction with a customer. Passenger number jumped 20% in a single year. In 2024, Ryanair generated 1.92 billion euros in net profit. That's more than Lufthansa Group, which carries fewer passengers on far larger, more complex operation. More than IAG, the parent company of British Airways and Iberia, more than Air France KLM. Ryanair cost per available seat kilometer, the single most important metric in the airline economics, is around 30% lower than every other major European carrier. Nobody else is close. They now operate over 600 aircraft. They carry 884 million passengers a year. They have firm orders of another 300 Boeing 737 MAX jets. They are not a budget airline anymore. They are the default airline of Europe. And here's the thing that breaks every assumption about the airline industry. Passengers don't have to love you. They don't even have to like you. They only have to book you. O'Leary understood something about consumer behavior that legacy carriers refuse to accept. For short-haul flights in Europe, price beats everything. A 3-hour flight is an inconvenience either way. If you can pay 29 euros to fly from London to Barcelona instead of 180 euros, most people will grit their teeth and click Ryanair bottom. They will complain about its dinner and then they will book it again next summer. Every low-cost carrier in Europe today is running some version of Ryanair playbook. EasyJet copied the secondary airport and single fleet model, but softened the customer experience. Wizz Air went further east, undercutting Ryanair in Central Europe. Norwegian tried to bring the model to long haul and collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. But none of them have matched Ryanair margins, because O'Leary didn't just copy Southwest. He took the model and stripped away every last remaining courtesy to the passengers. He built an airline that is in the most literal sense. Only an airline, everything else is a fee. So, the next time you see a headline about Ryanair passengers being charged 55 euros for a boarding pass, or a family broken up across the cabin for refusing to pay a seat selection fee, remember this. That's not a mistake. This is not a failure of customer service. That is a product. Michael O'Leary built an airline on the belief that his passengers would trade dignity for a cheap ticket. He was right, and 184 million people a year prove him right every time they click confirm. The most hated airline in Europe is also the most profitable, and nobody in the industry has figured out how to beat it, because they are still trying to make people happy.